The first question is how you, as a Mexican citizen, do you see the UN?
Well, the UN is a really complicated organism because we have a different perspective from what we should have. So the United Nations was never meant to be a world government. It was never intended for that. It's a world forum where all countries in the world can expose their different views and vote on different matters. And it's a place to lead on opinion. So it's a place where notions can be started, notions can be passed, but it's not supposed to create laws that apply to every single country in the world. Yes, there are the basic human rights that every nation adheres to, and it's part of the UN, but it's not meant to be a world government. So, as a Mexican citizen, particularly, or as a citizen of the world in general,
Mhm.
I think that there's this huge misconception of the UN. And once you get your head around it, I believe that the UN becomes a more logical organism with a lot of interesting and actually functional abilities. The United Nations helps in different humanitarian crises. It's not meant to be a world army that destroys every other army in the world, even though all members of the UN must have a percentage of their army ready at all situations to provide the UN, which is how the blue helmets are also provided in other different organisms. The UN is a seeker of peace, not of war. And they have peace above every single thing. And that's a couple of things you have to get your head around. However, I do believe that there's a humongous amount of bureaucracy related to the United Nations, and I do believe that that bureaucracy at times steps against this purpose of peace. And of course, it's exaggeratingly impossible to get to a point in which you can have all nations think the same ideals. You cannot have North Korea and the United States both agree on nuclear demilitarization, just like you cannot have, I don't know, Saudi Arabia and Poland agree on mutually integrative sexual laws. Different countries have different policies, and you have to respect that. But the UN works as a beautiful forum that allows all countries to express their opinions. That's my opinion as a citizen of the world.
Okay, thanks. And um, you rightly say that there is something that is not right, and I ask you how, for you, the DNA can change in the future, and how our generation can help this change. Well, I know that maybe it's we are speaking about something very very big, and it's not easy changing the relationship between the countries. But how you see a change for the Union?
Okay, I think it's important that if I'm going to try to solve the United Nations, I address the problem first. And this problem is called veto power. So the five nations that founded the United Nations have a special power in all notions called veto power, which is the United States, the United Kingdom, France, the USSR, now Russia has a power, and China. This veto power means that any notion in the United Nations, in the General Assembly, when it's voted upon, if one of these nations uses the veto power, that notion is nullified. It doesn't matter anymore. And it had been used historically a lot, but it gives a disadvantage that if 192 out of 193 nations both vote in favor of, I don't know, recognizing a new state, but the United States or Russia uses a veto power against it, the entire notion is disproven. And now I am not against veto power because veto power can be extremely useful. It's a representation of the world. But we have an ideological problem here because they're not evenly split amongst the world. Veto powers should only be allowed to be used in certain notions by a special committee that determines when a veto power can be used and when it cannot be used. Because at times, countries will tend to act for their own benefit instead of the benefit of the entire world, the benefit of their own citizens. And that's a real problem, particularly on a world debating forum. So veto powers could be extremely useful if used adequately and used with the proper arguments, and also distributed correctly. If they were given instead of, I don't know, for example, with the United States and Russia, they're complete opposites. China is a different economy, but then we have the United Kingdom and France, which have similar political ideologies to the US. Yes, they are in Europe and they have different mentalities. But you have two countries that are more or less the same. So if we took one of those veto powers and gave it to a country that was completely different, for example, Saudi Arabia, that's also an emerging economy and kicking ass in the world economy. Uh, if we redistributed the veto powers, we would have different results. And that's something we have to study and analyze. In order to answer your question, now that I've told the entire problem of veto power, I believe that we live in an era in which the power of community is truly being exploited through the internet. It had never occurred an era in which humanity had so much power to do change. And it's occurring everywhere. For example, the Time's Up movement that's just occurring against sexual assault. If we want to change the United Nations, we cannot do it one man at a time. We have to do it as a group, and we have to act, and we have to ask veto powers to either be removed or used adequately. You have to, and the most important thing is to be informed. You cannot ask people to have an opinion about the United Nations if they don't really know what the United Nations is about. As I said at the beginning of this interview, most people have this conception that the United Nations is this world government that is meant to rule us all, when it was never even intended to be that. And that's one of the points you have to understand. And if I had to say us as a generation, what we have to do in order to solve this situation, it would be to be better informed and to be willing to act. If there's something you don't like about the decisions of your country in the United Nations, speak up to it. The emails are public. Write an email complaining about it. And if you don't get a response, make a petition online. Make noise and always try to change the world.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you're right. I can say nothing more. And I think it's very clear also the answer of the third question that I want to ask you. And the question is that you know that Trump decide that from the next year USA will exit from UNESCO, that is an important part of ONU. So,
So, my opinions on the situation. So, definitely the decision to leave UNESCO is more of a political move made by the Trump administration than rather an actual desire to not participate in UNESCO. It all started, it wasn't the United Nations, it wasn't the United States the first one to do it. It was actually Israel that withdrew from UNESCO because UNESCO decided to protect
mhm.
World Heritage sites in Palestine. And of course, there's a lot of political tensions in the region, and the United States backed up Israel's decision to retreat from UNESCO. But we have to understand that out of 100 and I don't really know how many countries are registered in the UN, 193, 192 still participate in UNESCO. I don't think UNESCO is a bad organization. On the contrary, I think it's one of the best organizations the United Nations actually holds. It's an opportunity to defend human heritage, an opportunity to say, this heritage site, for example, here in Mexico, Chichen Itza, is something we have to preserve for the rest of humanity to have. We cannot have the luxury of destroying it in a war. And so we're going to allocate funds towards protecting it. And the same happens in every other country that's a member of the UN. The UN determines which parts are World Heritage sites, and we must protect them. So when talking about the Trump administration and most of the decisions, I think they're well thought out political decisions to put pressure against certain situations in the United Nations, particularly Palestine becoming an official state, which is a really taboo topic for both Israel and the United States, because it would put serious problems towards Israel's proclaimed on Cisjordania and the West Bank of land. So it's more a political decision to not support UNESCO for the U.S. than it is an actual step against the United Nations. That is my opinion about it.
Okay, thanks. And a very simple and stupid question. It's better something about politics, so take care about a political interest or human interest. So in this case, about UNESCO and about USA.
I think it's political interest. Every country has their best interests at all times, and that's something I always try to keep myself in my mind at all times. It does not matter if for the U.S., if it's Republican or Democrat, they always have their own ideas of how the country has to be run best, and they always want the best for the country, or at least that's what we hope is going to happen, or at least that's what we hope they want. I don't personally think that Donald Trump has any personal interest in not supporting the Palestinian state, but rather the United States has always been a loyal supporter of the state of Israel ever since it was founded. So it is a political decision over a human and personal decision. Many lives will be attacked and will be damaged by this decision. Many World Heritage sites will be put at risk, and the integrity of UNESCO not being supported by one of the biggest countries in the world is also at stake. But I think it's more of a political decision to put pressure into not recognizing Palestine as a state, rather than a decision of, oh, maybe Donald Trump has some intentions in Israel. I don't think it's personal. I think it's purely political in this case.
Okay, okay. And mm, speaking about ONU, speaking about the UNA, the nation have to take care about their interest or about the interest of all the nations, so about the world.
So I think the United Nations is not really supposed to have any particular opinion on issue. They seek
Of
peace
course.
at all costs. That's their mission, to achieve world peace. But they don't seek the interest of particular nations. They seek the interest of the majority of nations.
No, no, no. Of course. But I intend the single nation. The single nation has to take care about its care or about the care of the other.
Okay, so that's a really interesting debate, that is nationalism versus globalism. And I think that we cannot have a particular answer to this. I think there has to be a sense of nationalism and protection towards your own government, but there has to be this willingness to collaborate for the enhancement of the entire human race. So it has to be a mix of both. You have to look out for your citizens first, but you must always be willing to work for the best. So decisions like retreating from UNESCO, they don't really benefit your country at all, and they don't really benefit the world at all. Just like any other decision has to be thought out in both ways. If it benefits your country, it and it generally does, I would say that you should take it. I think that nationalism is something important for all nations. But if it doesn't, and if you're only taking it as a matter of a political piece of interchanging, then that's a more complicated topic. So in order to answer your question, I think there has to be a balance between nationalism and globalism, always being willing to collaborate for the best of humanity and for world peace.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very, very much, Jose Luis. And I think it's all if you want to add something, but you are very, very clear in these minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Carlo, for this invitation. It was truly an honor to be with you. And I want to make an emphasis in something I said during the interview, which is being informed. Your public is mainly our generation, and I want to know that the most important thing you could do today and the most important weapon you have is knowledge. So know what is happening. Read this man's blog. Read what's happening in the world. It's an amazing source of information, particularly of what's happening today. Just get to know what's happening in politics. I know that politics are really, really taboo, and the moment you start talking about politics, there can be incredible family fights about it. But you have a duty to be informed, and you have a duty to know, as well as you have a duty to act. You have this moral duty when you know something is not right, to stand up against it and try to make as much as possible. And I'm not saying you have to go to war or anything, but you get to make a video that becomes viral, or get to make a hashtag that everybody shares. We're in a generation where guns are becoming less important than phones. So that's what I believe, and that's what I think should happen. And